Another day that we've waken up and there's no war in the Middle East. There has been no strike from Iran. There has been no counterstrike from the Israeli side. And there's one more day where it's possible for negotiated settlement to take place, for just common sense, for rational thinking to actually have a chance to do its work. Now, how much longer that's going to last, who knows? But now then we're starting to get more information that it's not just a matter of when will or if Iran will attack into Israel, but whether Israel itself might launch a preemptive strike into southern Lebanon against the Hezbollah, possibly even against Iran. If apparently some reports are coming out that if Israel determines that an attack is for sure coming, they may not wait, they may strike. So we're now in a position where we're waiting to see who may strike first, and not whether somebody's going to strike, but which one makes the first move. And to unpack a lot of this, we have one of the show's favorites right now, especially because of his clothing choices, former CIA officer Larry Johnson. Larry, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Danny. Everybody grab your sunglasses.
yeah. I don't know. We're going to need that for the fire coming out of the Middle East, or for your shirt. It's a close battle right now. I'm not sure which is going to go. But listen, I know we're joking around a little bit here, but I mean, the situation here is deadly serious, is what's going on over there. This has ramifications, not just for the people in the Middle East, but for really the entire region, and in some sense, the world, definitely for the United States, because if we act stupid, we could turn a bad situation catastrophically bad. And I kind of fear that that's where we're heading. What is your general sense of the situation right now?
Well, I disagree with the one phrase you said, that if we act stupid. Danny, man, we are acting stupid. There's no if, ands, or buts about it. I know you're being charitable.
Desperately to hope, but well said.
So what we have right now is there's the vacuum of leadership in Washington. You know, Joe Biden has his problems figuring out what flavor of ice cream he wants, much less actually being in charge. You've got Blinken, Sullivan, and Austin, each sort of pursuing their own ends. But the Israel got on what I consider to be reliable sources, people that I know who they're talking to. Let me put it that way. The Israelis convinced themselves that they must launch a preemptive strike against Iran. Now, here's the logic. Israel, outside of the United States, has been the only country in the world that's gone out and bombed 4 other countries without those countries having initially attacked Israel. And Israel is preemptive. Now they're talking about doing it up to and including the use of nuclear weapons. And the irony is, we're talking about this. Here we are on August 7th. This is the day after August 6th, commemoration of the 79th anniversary of the use of an atomic bomb in Hiroshima. August 9th, the same commemoration for the bombing of Nagasaki. And here's the Israelis talking about using these weapons. The U.S. intelligence community, particularly alarming, is the United States intelligence community has convinced itself that Iran's not going to strike back, that Iran is going to make some noise, but that they're afraid they're going to back off. And that, I think, is a very dangerous assumption on the part of our intelligence community, because instead of considering the other possibility that, in fact, Iran is taking very careful preparations to deliver a very effective blow on Israel, that in turn is likely going to lead Israel to further lash out and to escalate up to and using nukes. They particularly want to use the nukes on the oil fields and some of what they call the nuclear facilities in Iran. But I've been involved with some of the military.
Larry, what is the thinking process here? Because or really not even just historically, but all the way across, anyone who's had nuclear weapons, the idea has always been that they're a weapon choice of last resort. So only if your territory is physically threatened, existential threat, and all that kind of stuff. But Israel has quite an arsenal. I mean, they do still have quite a bit of conventional power. What would be the thinking to lead with a nuclear weapon instead of conventional weapons?
To intimidate, The Israelis. Maybe it's not even most of the Israelis, but let's call it these Zionists, these ultra-nationalists. They've convinced themselves that they've got such a powerful military, and that with demonstrations of force like this, that they can force the Iranians and the Hezbollah fighters to flee in terror. That it's really sort of reminiscent of the kinds of delusional thinking we saw in Ukraine with respect to their counteroffensive and the offensive they launched in 2023. That and you had U.S. generals backing this, genuinely believed that all they had to do was start this attack, and that the Russians would go, "Oh my God, we've got to run away, run away." Well, that didn't happen. It was just the opposite. And that's the mistake that Israel's getting ready to make here, because the preparations that Iran is making are being made with Russia and with China. People forget that they have been conducting joint military exercises for scenarios just like this for more than 5 years. You don't carry out those exercises unless you also have plans in place that you can pull off the shelf, and you know what you're going to do in terms of supplying electronic warfare, air defense systems. The possibility that both China and Russia could provide Iran with hypersonic missiles, which Israel has no defense against, zero. And I think that, in fact, I believe that Russia has supplied those to Iran with the proviso that Iran cannot use them unless they are attacked again and more openly by Israel. Then it's game on, and this thing goes up the escalatory ladder.
Okay, now let's look at that part as well. So because we have some other things to share here about the circumstances that could prompt some of these attacks, especially in retaliation from the Iran/Hezbollah, because that's an equal part of this equation probably. But let's look at the thought process again. Okay, if Israel was just thinking about what they would want to do to Iran, and it's in isolation, and it's only those two states, then you can say, okay, yeah, if they have nukes and the other side doesn't, then the other side is powerless to do anything.
Right.
But it's not in isolation. And the idea that Russia and China, nuclear powers, would be passive in the face of them being used on one of their allies just seems ludicrous beyond compare. Is Israel just thinking that, well, yeah, but they, meaning Iran, Russia, and China, would not use their nuclear weapons on us in that situation? They would just get mad about it, but they wouldn't do anything. I mean, what could be the thinking there? Because, and let me actually put you in the position for the moment of looking at things from the Chinese or the Russian responses. How would they view an Israeli use of nuclear weapons?
They would see it as crossing a red line, because they would view it that Israel was doing this with the full permission, support of the United States. And so they'll say, okay, all these other actions that the United States is taking militarily against us has the ultimate goal of using nukes.
And what is the range of their potential? Let's look at one at a time. What would be the range of possible responses to this theoretical use of Israeli nuclear weapons? First of all, by Russia, what might they do? What's the range?
They will provide Iran weapons that could destroy much of Israel, would be my guess. It's not just going to be Russia. Turkey's going to be forced to respond in a way that up to this point, Erdogan, as we've talked about, has just been a bag of hot air. But this would be the game changer, because the people. I had someone on my blog the other day that sent me a note, because I'd written something about Egypt and said that Egypt was friendly with Israel, and the woman that wrote me is Egyptian. She was outraged. She says, we're not friends of Israel at all. And so that within the Egypt, and Doug McGregor's talked about this before as well on your show, that at the street level in these countries, the public pressure is going to become so great, it's going to force the governments to respond. So I could see Russia's not just going to supply Iran with weapons, but I think they'll actually put personnel on the ground that can assist Iran. And if nukes have been used, this is, we're going to be somewhere we've never been before. And the the initial reaction, the shock that will spread around the world. This is what's certain out of this is Israel will no longer be recognized as a legitimate state. The majority of the world will no longer tolerate Israel. And I think you could see the rise of, some have feared anti-Semitic attacks. I think Jews in general would be in danger around the world then. The efforts to retaliate against them would be so great that they had crossed this line. And that's what this Israeli leadership's not thinking about.
Yeah.
They're thinking about only the use of force without what are the political implications. It's not going to make you more welcome, more embraced, more loved, more supported. It's going to leave you more isolated, and not just people, oh, well, we're not going to invite them to our dinner party kind of isolation. This is, they'll view them as, these people are crazy. They can't be allowed to have these weapons. They must be stopped.
Once they show that they have it, of course, now then you've got it's even more complicated than that, because now then the thought, well, they've used them here, they can do it again. So now then there's fear of nuclear escalation. So that could mitigate people, but it definitely will, I think on a personal level, will create the possibilities for genuine anti-Semitism on an in-person level to countries all over the world where Jews live. And so the Israeli government in that event would put their own people at risk. But I want to look at the other half of that equation before we get off of this topic. Chinese side, because they also have their own issues that are different from Russia's, even if they're somewhat related. What do you see the range of possible reactions from Beijing?
Yeah, they're going to be providing material support to Iran as well. But I think they're looking at this as, they're not just focused on Iran, because they see this, they're hearing the rhetoric in the United States that China's the enemy. Not that China's an adversary, not that China's a competitor. China's the enemy, and that we must be prepared, the United States must be prepared to go to war with China. And so, the Chinese are hearing that, and then they're looking at what the United States is doing. Because, I know, the Chinese know, the Russians know that Israel's attack on Hania in Tehran was planned and was at least coordinated with the United States in advance. And how do we know that? Because the dispatch of the Marine Mew to the region, that decision was taken well before Israel launched that attack. Those units, as they don't just call them up and they're not like the firefighters. You call them up and in 5 minutes they're out of the fire station headed out. And the other carrier task force that are deployed again to outfit those ships and the logistics required to get them ready. This is a planned escalation on the part of the United States, and Russia and China are seeing that. And I think they are now prepared to respond accordingly, without, necessarily tipping their hands right off the bat. But this thing is so dangerous because it goes beyond just, the Israel bombing a bunch of Palestinians in Gaza.
Yeah, and let's look at the other part of that equation, because none of those things can be lost on either Iran or Hezbollah. And so they may have their own motivation to try and preempt, or to even more so to do a counterstrike based on the assassinations that have taken place on their territory here in just the last number of days. Here is what Hassan Nasrallah said about a week ago after, I think, one of the assassination attempts in Beirut. Watch his comments.
Now they were in a state of joy. and they're proud of themselves that in a few hours we killed Sayyid Muhsin in Dahi in southern Beirut, and we killed the leader, the Mahdi Haniya in Tehran, and a few days ago we struck Hudaydah in Yemen, and so they can't see in front of them because they're so proud. Okay, laugh a bit and you'll weep a lot, because you don't know what red lines you have crossed and what kind of aggression you carried out and where you've taken the situation. Hence, yes, we, for the enemies and the friends, on all of these supportive battlefronts, now we've entered a new phase.
Now we've entered a new space. Now, a lot of the complaints about Nasrallah, some of it has some justification behind it over the years, is that he's a lot of hot air. He says things he doesn't mean. He's just talking to his domestic people to keep them happy, but he's never going to actually take any action here offensively. How do you see that?
People just aren't paying attention to what's been going on over the last 6 months. You know, it's like they say, well, we're going to see if Hezbollah is going to launch an attack. They've been attacking. They've been launching missiles and rockets into Israel 10 to 12 times a day over the last month. I mean, if that's not some offensive action, I don't know what else you'll call it. So, and it's been effective to the point that Israel had to evacuate all of the settlements up north, and all these people are staying in hotels. I guess it's around 100,000 people at least, and Hezbollah has been hitting Israeli military bases and both intelligence collection sites as well as patrol bases. And Israel, for its part, has been bombing Hezbollah sites in southern Lebanon. So, the war is going on. Now, what we're looking at is whether or not Hezbollah will step it up to a level that they will literally try to flood the zone with, instead of launching a dozen missiles or rockets, that they'll launch hundreds or maybe even thousands in a coordinated attack with the Houthis and with Iran to overwhelm Israel's air defense system. And the question is whether Israel will follow up on its vow that it's going to send in armored columns into southern Lebanon to try to push Hezbollah north of the Litani River.
Yeah, and we're actually going to talk about that here in just a little bit in terms of what Israel is saying. But here's what the United States is saying so far, because I think kind of filling into the gap of what you said, that the United States just doesn't think that this is possible. You talked about our intelligence community. Well, our political community seems to be in lockstep with that to the extent that they actually are thinking. But here's Lindsey Graham talking about, here's what we should do.
Since the Senate resolution I introduced today, that says that any escalation by Hezbollah against Israel that leads to a major confrontation should be viewed as an attack carried out and executed by Iran. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, President Kennedy rightly indicated that an attack emanating from Cuba against the United States would be an attack emanating from the Soviet Union. We would hold the Soviet Union liable for any attack coming from Cuba because Cuba was a proxy of the Soviet Union. That same doctrine, in my view, applies to Iran. What should the target list include? Not only should Israel hold Iran accountable for any escalation by Hezbollah, the United States should do the same.
So a couple things there. Number one, anything Israel does is totally cool and justified and necessary. And if Hezbollah or Iran escalate, i.e. respond for their territory being attacked by Israel, somehow there's something wrong with that. And so we should be ready, like the Cuban Missile Crisis, to join in with Israel and to go after Iran and Hezbollah. That doesn't seem quite to fit American law or any kind of alliance treaties we have.
Yeah, see, the ignorance of people like Graham, and unfortunately there are a lot of Americans that share his ignorance when he talks about the Cuban Missile Crisis. That was provoked by us. We put nuclear missiles in Turkey on the border of Russia first. We did that. Then when the Soviets responded, oh my God, how dare you? And there was that recording, I think we talked about it before, from the Kennedy talking to George Bundy, the national security advisor, and he's got the Secretary of Defense, everybody's and the director of CIA. And at the outset of this crisis, he goes, man, I'm trying to figure out why, this is what he said, I'm trying to figure out why Khrushchev would do something like this. I mean, he's acting like we've put missiles in Turkey. And he didn't, President Kennedy didn't know that we had missiles in Turkey. And there was an uncomfortable silence around the table. And I don't know if it was Alan Dulles or McGeorge Bundy that said, Mr. President, we did put missiles in Turkey. So this is a common theme for the United States. We pretend that when these incidents happen, that we're just innocent victims. That it just fell upon us. Like bombing of the U.S. Embassy in Beirut in 1983, and then the bombing of the Marine barracks, as we call it, in November of 83. Now, that was Hezbollah, that in Magnia, just out of the blue, hates us because of our freedom, ignoring the fact that our battleships had been pouring in shells into the Bekaa Valley, killing Lebanese Muslim women, children, and men. And they died. How would we as Americans react if some foreign power was killing our people here in our country? We would kill them. We would want to strike back. So when these foreigners start striking back, we're all of a sudden go, oh, how could that happen? So here's Graham imagining in his world that you can just punch Iran in the nose and all they can do is cry. No, they can shut down the Gulf of the Straits of Hormuz for starters. Can sink some of our aircraft carriers for starters. And then all of a sudden, they're going to expose the United States as a paper tiger. Yeah, we've got a lot of nuclear weapons. Yeah, we've got a lot of air power. But our ability to actually project and sustain power overseas is extremely limited. Extremely limited
is even the key part here.
Yeah.
And so that's with Lindsey Graham, the politician. Now here is an alleged military guy who's supposed to know better. And we're going to see a couple of thoughts here from Jack Keane. First of all, I'm going to show you that he actually gets part of this right. Here's how he is describing the military situation and how challenging it may be. Watch this one.
It likely may come in two waves as opposed to what we saw the last time. And the Iranians, they've got to rethink what they did back on April the 13th, because the drones that they launched gave 4 to 5 hours early warning, given the distance it takes to travel to get to Israel. And the United States, Britain, France, and Jordan all had their fighters up waiting to receive those drones and destroyed almost all of them. And it certainly gave early warning to the missiles that were about to come as well, and gave the Israeli air defense systems, plenty of time to get set for that. And on top of that, 50% of the missiles that Iran fired malfunctioned. So certainly they have got to correct the mistakes they've made. And I think they're going to try to present a greater challenge to the Israelis, I would imagine, as a result of this.
Okay, so just on the surface of it, on that part right there, he's right. The Israelis are going to realize, going to have to understand that Iran learned from that last, the April situation. The challenge is more difficult for them, et cetera. So as far as that goes, not too bad.
Yeah, because what Keane didn't say, and what most people need to recognize, that the Iranian strike in April was orchestrated. It was orchestrated with the cooperation. The United States intervened, a number of Arab Muslim countries intervened, and the Iranians received assurances. Look, don't kill a bunch of people. We understand you need to strike back, so strike back in a way, but we'll be able to counter it. But you will have sent your message about how that you can reach out and touch them. And Iran said, okay, all right, that's what we'll do. And they were warning everybody. I mean, they tipped off everybody in advance. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And so when we stopped it, rather than fess up that, hey, we sort of orchestrated this, Israel and the United States started to take a victory lap. Boy, we showed them those Iranians, they're no good, they're weak, they're equipped, they're missiles, and it's like, so Iran's listening to this, but they'd been assured that do this and we'll stop. Israel will not, touch you again. Well, then what happens? You get the assassination of Haniyeh, the Hamas Politburo chief. And now Iran said, wait a second. We listened to you the first time. You lied. Your assurances are not worth the paper they're written on. So now we're going to take matters into our own hand, which is exactly what the Iranian ambassador to the UN, speaking before the Security Council, said about a week and a half ago, where he went through it in detail. He says, look, you got a national rules-based order here. You tell us that we need to follow that. Yet, when you've got a country like Israel that routinely breaks the law, violates international law, commits genocide, you take no action. There are no sanctions. You do nothing. When you punch up. So either you do something, or we're going to take care of matters ourselves under Article 51 of defense. We will do that.
Yeah. And we're going to get to that in a minute, because that's actually a question that was actually asked of Matt Miller at the State Department a couple of days ago. We'll get to that in a second. But here to just really highlight just how much trouble we got at our government level. Now this is Keene talking again here, but he's saying the biggest problem is not that Israel needs to, do better on its weapons, but the problem is actually our government, because we haven't killed enough people. Watch this.
The greatest strategic failure of the Biden administration, I believe, is their hands-off approach they have dealing with Iran. We would not be where we are today with all of these proxies operationalized and an axis of resistance trying to destroy Israel. Yep. If the Biden administration had just strengthened what the Trump administration was doing, built on that success. And here we are, right in the middle of a Middle East war as a result of the hands-off policy dealing with Iran.
So, Larry, his reference there was when the Trump administration had assassinated Soleimani, I think January of 2020. And if only Biden had continued that and just kept on killing a bunch of Iranians, everything would be fine. They would just back down. How do you view that?
We had that strategy in Iraq, and we had that strategy in Afghanistan. Hey, all we got to do is kill these top leaders, man. All this thing will go away. Never works out that way. Never has. So the notion that we can, quote, kill our way out of this is dangerous in the first place, and it's really futile. I remember sitting when I was still working consulting with JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command, and I was actually over in Iraq. This was 2006. And I was sitting with one of the commanders of one of the sectors that they had Iraq divided up into. And we went over, hey, your policy is to go out and conduct these raids every night. Delta Force was the one doing it. They're doing capture operations. They're probably doing 14 to 19 a night, which is an incredible pace. And they'd bring people back for interrogation and go out and hit again. And I said, so you're doing all this kill capture and you're killing, here's the casualty, you knew how many of these bad guys we were killing, yet the terrorist incidents were continuing to increase. And I said, so shouldn't it be the opposite? We're killing all these people and the numbers should go down. And he goes, yeah, because the intelligence showed is that the reason for most of the terrorist attacks is they were being paid. A lot of soldiers that Jerry Bremer, our former, had been to Cuba of Iraq after we took it down, had sent all the soldiers home with no money, but with their weapons. So now they were being paid to carry out these attacks. So we didn't learn from that you can't kill your way out of it. We ended up subsequently doing, fortunately, was they started paying off some of the sheikhs to provide security. And the terrorists started dropping off. So what it reflects is just a profound misunderstanding and ignorance about the Middle East. Iran is not this massive terrorist state. That's our Western meme. That's what we use to justify our act against. And we again ignore the fact of what the United States has done in the history of Iran. They wonder, we wonder why the Iranians hate us. Well, look at what the United States have done to Iran.
And I want to kind of go down that path here a little bit because I think that what you can see is that the United States is basically losing control of the situation completely, even with the passive part that we've done, because I think that what we would like to do is to be able to control Israel so that they don't, they play around in a small band of what's acceptable, but not too much further, that Iran stays in its bubble and that we can basically kind of keep everything in charge in the playpen. But now then that's starting to fall apart on both sides of this. Now watch this. Yeah. First of all, here is Matt Miller talking about what our United States policy is actually starting to be. And then I'm going to show you something from Blinken said also yesterday that just doesn't look good for us. Watch first Miller.
Really, since October 7th, we have made it one of our prime diplomatic purposes to really try to prevent this conflict from escalating. On every one of Secretary Blinken's 8 trips to the region, he has focused on pushing for de-escalation, pushing for steps to calm tensions, and obviously that has been what he has been working on, what the president and what other members of the administration have been working on for the past few days, trying to send very strong messages to Iran that they should not escalate this conflict, that their proxies should not escalate this conflict. And of course, as we have always made clear, we will defend Israel against terrorism. We will defend Israel against attacks. And we are urging all parties in the region to take any steps that they can to de-escalate so this conflict doesn't spin out of control.
See, Larry, here's why I think the term incompetence is appropriate to apply to our senior leadership right now, because you have there Matt Miller saying the avowed policy of the United States is to de-escalate. We're trying to go for a 2-state solution, allegedly. We're trying to get a negotiated settlement to at least a ceasefire to start off with. All these things we're doing, and we keep going over and over to the Middle East. 8 times he talked about Blinken going over there. Right. And yet we are completely ignored by the Israeli side to the point in public being repudiated. And yet we still then add the last part. But we're going to do whatever Israel tells us, and we're going to defend them no matter what. So even when they blow us off, publicly humiliate us, completely contradict what we say we want, we're still going to give fealty to them. I cannot understand that. I just don't get it.
Well, this goes back to the 1970s, so we'll go back 50 years when the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee got it put into motion, and recognized that they would have to shore up support from the United States in order to keep the Zionist project intact. And so that money has been, very influential in our political system. Just, the AIPAC took down Cori Bush, this Democrat member of Congress who's, she's known for pretty extreme views, but she was pretty outspoken about against Israel. Got rid of her. And they pump millions of dollars into a congressional campaign, so it sends a message. But the United States we've decided that we're going to back Israel, right or wrong, and we're only 2 countries right now that's in a position we could bring an end to this killing. And if we think that the slaughter of these Palestinians is not going to leave a residue of revenge, that we will be blown down the road and that American interests will be attacked. That's when we like to use this term terrorism to demonize people without recognizing that there's always a motive. Genuinely, terrorism is always inspired by actions that have involved us. And the fact of the matter is, America was founded on terrorism. The Boston Tea Party was an act of terrorism, as we would define it today. The ambushes at Lexington and Concord were terrorism. Because America, we start off as a group of terrorists because we were overthrowing British colonial rule, and the notion that none of these other countries can be allowed to pursue their own, and they constantly portray Iran as this, the great terrorist state, forgetting about our own role enabling them in the first 8 years of their existence after the revolution in '79. It was in February of 1981 that the CIA walked into the White House with a representative of Israel to persuade the Reagan administration to start authorizing the sale of weapons to Iran. U.S. weapons. That's, it didn't start with Iran-Contra. It started before that. And Reagan said, yeah. And yet in 1983, we get attacked in Lebanon, but the weapons we kept flowing to Iran. So, I mean, we played this double game. And, we like to pretend that our hands are clean and our garments are pure white. But no, we got dirty hands and dirty garments.
Yeah, and so here's how to give the demonstration of what Blinken does, our Secretary of State, which is supposed to be our number one diplomat. Here's how he is characterizing things also yesterday.
No one should escalate this conflict. We've been engaged in intense diplomacy with allies and partners, communicating that message directly to Iran. We communicated that message directly to Israel. Our commitment to Israel's security is ironclad. We will continue to defend Israel against attacks from terrorist groups or their sponsors, just as we'll continue to defend our troops. It's urgent that everyone in the region take stock of the situation, understand the risk of miscalculation, and make decisions that will calm tensions, not exacerbate.
See, to me, Larry, this just humiliates our country, because he is specifically saying we're using all this negotiation power and diplomacy with Iran and with Israel, and both sides are completely ignoring everything that we're saying, which shows the United States, which Biden loves to always say are the most powerful military in the history of the world. We can't even control our ally, much less this other adversary in the Middle East, which shows we're completely feckless.
Yeah. And then on top of it, you're getting these images that are coming out of Israel that are just simply horrific, where you have members of the government openly stating that they have the right, that Israeli soldiers and prison guards have the right to rape Palestinian men and women, to sexually violate them, because
I hadn't seen that one.
No, I'll send you the video. There was an argument at one of the cabinet meetings, because one of what I'd call the sane Israelis was, they were talking about the arrest of the prison guards down at the prison for the sexual assault, and this one settler type are screaming at him that we have the right to rape. I mean, he said it, and I'm going, good God. So, imagine if you were living in a situation where there was somebody you viewed as a foreign power controlling that particular area, and word comes that one of your family members has been raped by the soldiers or the prison guards of that power. Do you think you would react in any way, that you would want to do violence and fight back? Well, that's part of what we got going on here. And to pretend that this is, something different than that is just, it's ignoring the reality. So,
well, and Larry, you mentioned this a second ago, and it tails in exactly with what you're talking in right here about what happens when actions are taken. There's always counteractions, always, whether we want them to or not. But in the same press conference there with Miller a moment ago, one of the reporters asked, what about, and I think it was Article 51 of the UN Charter he cited, does Iran not have the right to retaliate when its people are assassinated in its country, when its embassies are blown up, etc.? And here's how that went.
So you are acknowledging that they do have the right to respond?
No, I did not acknowledge that.
Okay.
I acknowledged the question. I take the point of your question, Saeed. It is not in any way, however, useful at all for anyone in the region for Iran to consider taking such steps, because of the risk, as I said, that this could potentially get out of control. And that's the message we will continue to impress on them.
So the message is, look, I don't want y'all to respond the way we would in like manner. I just want you to do nothing so that our interests continue to be preserved and we get to keep on doing stuff to you no matter what. But that's insanity, because that's just not how humanity works.
Right. Yeah. Well, and look how people are starting to react in this country to government pushing the word now that it was Iran that tried to assassinate Donald Trump. Iran may have motive to try to pay for some money, but that's a kind of distraction. But regardless of whether there's a distraction, the fact that when that happens, we get enraged. How dare they? Well, why do we think that Israel can continue pulling off these attacks inside Iran? I mean, this isn't the first one. And let's not forget that the United States is a sponsor of terrorism. And people go, wait, why do you hate America? All I know is that the Mujahideen al-Khalq, MEK, was a designated terrorist group by the United States because it had carried out acts of terrorism inside Iran, where it was bombing and killing civilians. And then during George W. Bush's administration, hey, we're going to take them off the list. They're no longer terrorists. Our buddies. We started arming, training, funding, and they've carried out terrorist attacks inside Iran. If from an Iran standpoint, yes, the United States is a sponsor of terrorism that's actually killing people in Iran. We're doing that, and we pretend that we're not. And then we want people to respect us, that we say we're against terrorism. Terrorism's a threat that we can. They realize we're so full of crap, because terrorism is just a convenient label that we can put on somebody to demonize. Because whenever it's viewed in our interest to a group that's going to carry out attacks against civilians, by God, we do it and have done it.
Yeah, we just put a better tag on it. Larry, I want to shift back, gears a little bit here and go to something you wrote on your blog, sonar21.com. A couple of things that you wrote that I want to pull out here. One is that you wrote that Israel, for its part, is living in its own world of delusion. I received the following email from an acquaintance who is in touch with some younger Israeli occupation forces troops, and it is telling. I wonder if, without me reading that whole thing there, if you can kind of tell the gist of what that email told you and how you interpret the views of this young IDF soldier you're talking about.
Yeah, so he characterizes the military leadership as being a bunch of leftist defeats, that they are that they're political opponents of Netanyahu, therefore they sort of want this war to go away. And there's corroboration for that, because there was a report day before yesterday, that Netanyahu into a streaming match with the head of the head of the army and Mossad, and called them a bunch of cowards and defeatists, because both the Mossad and the head of the Israeli military were arguing they needed to actually get a negotiated settlement and bring this conflict in Gaza to an end, because they actually recognized the strain it was putting on the troops. But then here you get this young, in his 20s, and where he's got this worldview that, oh boy, yeah, we're just destroying these guns right and left. You are, because they're not armed. The only ones that you get ambushed by a bunch of guerrillas, but you're not fighting an armed force that is comparable peer. And then also reflects that he's got, hey, all we got to do is go on the level, will Hezbollah be running in terror. So you've got these guys convinced that they can easily defeat Hezbollah, they can take on Iran, they can do anything. And yet they're not stepping back and saying, hey, you've been in Gaza now for 10 months. You've not defeated Hamas, who is not an armed force in terms of an army with a command structure and logistics supply. They don't have air defense. They don't have artillery. They don't have armor. And yet you're struggling to beat them. How?
And one of the things about that, the the comment I read from one of the things that kid wrote in there is that he said, "Hey, we can go to the to fight in Lebanon because all we got to do is push maybe 5 kilometers up to the Litani River, and they're going to run it because it's not an existential fight for them. They'll just quit and give up and go up." And as you can see on the map right here, that the Litani River is about halfway up there. If you can't see that. It's a little bit halfway, it goes from right to left on the screen there. And it's more like about 20 to 25 kilometers. And by the way, all of this stuff, some of these arrows you see on there, this is from previous fights between Israel and Hezbollah in the southern part of Lebanon there. That is very, very difficult terrain. Hezbollah has been spending years preparing defensive positions in there, and it would be like going into a buzzsaw for the IDF, especially after 10 months of fighting in this lower level thing here. I think that he is dramatically underestimating the military challenge to going up to the Litani River.
Yeah, again, the Israelis believe that with enough force they can do it, except they don't go back and look at what happened in 2006. Tried this in 2006, and yeah, they inflicted some damage on Hezbollah, but Hezbollah in turn caused the Israelis to some significant casualties, and they finally recognized, okay, we got to pull back. I think their plan this time is to use massive, they describe as massive bombings of Lebanon to, stop Hezbollah. And you're a former Army guy, so maybe you can explain to me, what is this obsession with the Air Force? That they believe if we only drop enough bombs, man, we can win. We tried that in Vietnam and didn't turn out too well. We even tried it in Korea, didn't turn out too well. We always keep coming back to this reality that we got to call up Danny Davis and his brigade of tanks and say, "Hey, Danny, come help, come save us."
Yeah, it's hardly ever worked, or just area bombs. I mean, you can even go to Hitler trying to subjugate Great Britain by bombing the Battle of Britain with air, only with air. You killed a whole bunch of people, and all you did is strengthen their resolve to fight back against you. And that's the way it is. Unless you have a ground force to follow that up, it's a great combination, but by itself, it's not going to do anything. If they don't send the IDF on the ground here, all they're going to do is kill a bunch of people and harden the resolve. And that's actually one of the last points I wanted to make here from your work there. Gary, if you could put that last one up there, is that the Israelis themselves are kind of hardened. So they want to say that the other side is going to basically back down, but they themselves are so enraged that they're actually thinking about a preemptive strike by Israel. Now, you mentioned this a little bit at the first, but you talked about here, and I want you to elaborate a little bit. You say that Erdogan in Turkey, King Abdullah of Jordan, and Sisi in Egypt, and you can even add in some others in the region there that also may take some actions that aren't liking what's going on here. But wonder if you can talk about that part of what you wrote in your deal, and how much threat do you think there really is for Israel to launch a preemptive strike?
To be effective in the world, so Israel is not an independent country. It's dependent upon the flow of oil. Up to this point, Erdogan in Turkey, despite all of his railing against the Israeli policy and denouncing them for what they're doing to the Palestinians, has been quite willing to let the oil that's coming out of Syria and parts that are occupied by U.S. forces and by Kurds, that oil is flowing through Turkey and then going to Israel. And Israel is then refining it there, and it's the gas and airplanes. Well, if Israel now escalates this beyond what already happened, then I think you'll see Turkey finally cut that oil off. And the irony there is, once that oil stops flowing, Israel actually is going to have to stop fighting. They do not have the wherewithal to continue to sustain themselves and with all their fuel needs to operate the economy as well as to operate the military. Sisi in Egypt, up to this point, has kept the Egyptian military out of it. But I can see the political pressure becoming great because the people are just fed up and furious. Up to this point, I think Sisi and There's a group of them. They've been profiting upon the smuggling that's gone through the tunnels that go from Egypt into the Gaza Strip. And that is also included with the cooperation of the Israelis. Let's not forget that in the past, that Israel, everybody's getting a taste. They were making money off of this. Sisi is going to be in trouble on that. And so either he will back action against Israel, potentially military action by Egypt to come in from the south. Jordan, King Abdullah II is he could be in grave danger as well, because there are enough Palestinians residing in Jordan that they could rise up. And frankly, some of the Jordanian Defense Force as well would be so sickened by, particularly if Israel chooses to use nukes. They've got to be, and I'm not raising that idly. There are the people that are talking about this in Israel are in a decision-making position where they can make this happen. And this is the kind of thing that we had strong leadership in Washington. They'd be calling them up and said, no, under no circumstances do you even consider this. This is not even an option. But that's not happening.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of where I wanted to, the final question here. If there is a war, no matter who starts it, whether it's the Hezbollah Iranian side, whether it's an Israeli side that's launching off on a preemptive strike, so-called, it's bad for the region. It could be catastrophic for us, even if it stays conventional. This could get so ugly. It could spread so big. You got the possibility for Russia and China to get involved in one capacity or another, and this thing could just take on a life of its own. If you were advising the current White House, even in this current dysfunctional system, what would you advise we do right now before any of this has happened?
Call up Netanyahu and say, stand down. This is going to stop now. And if you refuse to stand down, we're cutting off all oil and all military assistance. No money, no oil, no military assistance. You'll be on your own. Now, politically, that's not going to happen in the United States because of the influence that the Israelis have bought. But if we did that, it would bring this to a screeching halt. And then the other thing we should do with that is work with China and Russia, who have the access and control, some wield influence with respect to Iran, as well as with the new BRICS nation, Saudi Arabia, which is part of BRICS, to come in and work on separating the sides. Now, this still is not going to solve the issue in Israel of these 800,000 settlers in the West Bank that insist that land's theirs, but it would at least separate the sides, stop the fighting. I mean, it's like if you're out in public and you see two people brawling, they're about ready to kill themselves. If you can get them in and get them separated and get people, to calm down and step back, you can save their lives from someone getting killed. But we're not doing that now. The message is, Iran, you've got to surrender. Israel, you can do whatever you want to do. And Iran said, no, we're not going to live that way.
I've got a really strange analogy to pull on here, but work with me here for a second. My wife and I went to a coffee shop that we love to go to a couple of nights back, and there was just a real disturbance going on. There was this young couple that just had this little child that looked like about a 2.5, 3-year-old girl that was just having a full-on meltdown about begging or screaming and yelling. She was actually in the mall on a bicycle. Not sure how that happened, but it was just really starting to annoy us because we couldn't even talk. She was screaming. The father tried to get her to come over, and she would, scream at her, and he would back off, and he would say, "Oh, please, please." He's trying to negotiate with his daughter, and I was already saying that's a stupid thing to do. His mother comes over, the child's mother comes over, she tries to help her. She starts to hitting her mother, and the mother, you see her shoulders slump, she turns off. Why am I telling you all this? Because that sounds like the same thing you're describing about our current administration here. Yeah. We have no power over. This is a 3.5-year-old kid, and the two parents were literally terrified of this little kid here. Instead of just picking the kid up and saying, "We don't do that in public. Let's go home." Something like that. Yeah, that's what we're doing. The most powerful nation on the earth, with thousands of nuclear weapons and the ability to project power around the globe, can't even tell this nation of 6 million people, their leader, you're not going to do this. And instead, they're calling all the shots and we're cowering in fear. It just blows my mind how we got to this point.
Yeah. No, it is. It's we've made the world more dangerous because of it. By enabling Netanyahu in promoting it, people anti-Semite, fine, call names, but reality is what reality is. And we're Smotrich the other day, the one minister in Netanyahu's government,
Finance, yeah,
called for. He said, "Hey, let 2 million of the Gazans, let them die. Let's just starve them. Let them die."
Moral. He said he is alleged to have said it would be moral. We can't do it for political reasons, but it would be good. I mean, that just shows you where the mentality is. And instead of us condemning that utterly, not a peep.
Yeah. So, and that's where, Russia and China are watching this carefully, and they are, I guarantee you, they're counseling Iran not to act recklessly. And I think the way that the Russians and Chinese are hoping this plays out is that when the time comes, Iran's going to hit a specific target in Israel. It's not going to be that massive across the board strike that we saw in April, which was a demonstration. They're going to hit it with a cruise or ballistic missile that Israel can't stop. It will cause significant damage to an Israeli site, maybe even kill some Israeli soldiers. They're not going to attack a civilian site. Well, and at that point, Israel and China, they'll say, okay, hold your fire. Iran's standpoint, they will have sent the message. Israel's going to retaliate. And at that point, Israel will probably retaliate with maybe even go with the nuclear option then. And then this thing gets out of control. Because what the Chinese and Russians are looking at from the United States is, get a leash on your dog there. Get a leash on that dog. You're the ones who you're arming the Ukrainians who are attacking civilians. You're arming the Israelis who are attacking civilians. You need to stop. And the United States, its policy in regards to both, it's really the same cloth of what we're seeing in Ukraine and what we're seeing with Israel. Only when it comes to the two, Ukraine's the redheaded stepchild. Israel's the favored son.
Yeah, and that's where we are right now. Listen, I appreciate you coming on today, and even though there's some really disturbing information you're hearing, we need to know the truth, and all we can do is just hope and pray at this point that somehow sanity gets back in, and at least we put the leash back on and hold off from some of the worst outcomes here. But right now it's out of our control. We just have to watch and see what's going to happen. We will continue to bring you any updates as we get them, and an analysis like this we can have. Want to remind you to go on Sonar 21 to where you can see the full article there that I was referring to that Larry had written there. He's also got a new YouTube channel, Countercurrents. That's interesting. And also, by the way, let me publicly say I appreciate you kind of helping us out, because I'll be taking about a 10-day vacation with family here coming up, and you have agreed to do at least a few guest host on our show, and really excited about that, actually.
Happy to do so, but people will say, we can't wait for the good-looking guy to get back.
Oh, well, who's that? We have to. Oh, you're talking about Larry. Yeah. Well, Gary.
Oh, I'm talking about you.
We'll be fine. Anyway, thank you for coming on today, and we appreciate you guys watching us. Be sure and like and subscribe. We also have John Mearsheimer on later today. We're going to keep looking at this from a different perspective, and just kind of how some of the Israeli lobby and some of the efforts from Israel, and how we got to the point to where America literally has handed over the keys of our country to another country. And then you're not going to want to miss that. Believe me, John Mearsheimer has things that you're just not going to get from anybody else. So tune in today. I believe that's at 2:00 our time, and we will see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.